So I want to start with the story of Angulimala. Some of you know this story, and I mentioned it right before we got started. I was asking Deborah Kelly if she had the original little pamphlet, because there are many versions of this story, and the one that I like most, maybe because it's the first one that I ever heard, was the one that Steph had. I think he actually had edited it significantly, and it's in this little pamphlet. And so sometime Deborah was going to send that to me, and sometime I'll read you the actual story of Angulimala. But I'm going to summarize it here. I've talked about it before, Angulimala. So there was in India at the time of the Buddha, there was a young man, Ahimsa, who was apprenticed to an older man. I forget what they were, shoemakers or butchers, not really relevant. And Ahimsa really was devoted to this older man. The old man had shown him great kindness, and the young man just, really strongly valued the mentorship, the caring, and so on. Well, one day, who knows why, the old man decided that Ahimsa was having an affair with his wife. And he banished him from the place, from the business. And Ahimsa was absolutely devastated, so devastated. He had loved this man, and he was being accused of betrayal, and he was just decimated. And in that moment, he made a vow that he was going to kill 1,000 human beings. So great was his anger and his frustration. And he decided that he was going to keep track of the people that he killed by cutting off a finger and stringing those fingers around his neck like a mala, a prayer beads. And so he set off doing that. And the entire countryside was absolutely terrified, because whenever he came upon somebody, he robbed and murdered them. And as this was going on, he became more and more depraved, more and more, less human, more depraved, more gruesome, more violent, just terrible, 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 terrible being. When we got to the point where we only needed one more finger to complete this grisly project. And he came across a man walking in the woods. The man was older, and he thought, well, he'll be easy prey. And he started after him. And no matter how fast Angulimala walked, he couldn't catch this man. And he started running, and he still couldn't catch the man. At some point, he realized, whoa, something is going on here. This is not normal. And he calls out to the man and engages him. And of course, you've probably guessed by now that this was Shakyamuni Buddha. And the Buddha engages Angulimala and takes him into his Sangha. And he takes him into the Sangha and gives him the opportunity to practice, and forgives him, essentially. Extends compassion to this most miserable of human beings. And Angulimala, that's his brother. Angulimala is totally transformed by his life in the Sangha and by the practice of the Dharma, which he practices very sincerely. So at some point, the king's soldiers who are hunting for this criminal, for this murderer, come to Shakyamuni's camp, and they don't even recognize him. And they say to the Buddha, is this Angulimala Ahimsaha here? He says, no, he's not here. And he's not lying, because the person that's there is so profoundly transformed. It is not this vicious, murdering person. Now, this story is often told as an example of the power of the Dharma. And it certainly is that. And we see that today with so many of these Dharma prison projects that are around the country and the world, where our Angulimalas are transforming themselves through the Dharma, through the practice. But the other piece here is that this is also an example of the Shakyamuni's compassion. Who else would have, at that moment that this grisly being arrived, invited him into the Sangha, taken him in, given him a chance to practice, to rehabilitate? Excuse me. Excuse me. Okay. So to me, this is also an example of the Buddha's boundless compassion. Who else would have just, would have taken this guy in and given him a chance? So you may see where I'm going with this. I'm segueing back to the conversation we've had recently about the Dalai Lama. And the reason I'm coming back to that is several-fold. One, Brad Warner has given a couple of talks on this, perhaps since we talked about it last, I don't know. And one of his talks is entitled "The Dark Side of the Dalai Lama." And he presents a case for our sort of misunderstanding of the Dalai Lama. And then I also received a video from Cal that was made by Tibetans. And extremely well made, extremely comprehensive, and probably, in my view, is decisive. But we'll come back to that. So those two things have led me to rethink this thing and to look at it again, because I think it's so important, as not even the circumstances or the specifics of this thing, but what it brings up for us as Buddhist practitioners in terms of our ethics, in terms of our precept of not judging others. It's, I hate to say it's rich, but because that it's a very terribly sad, difficult situation, but it is a rich opportunity to examine ourselves, our own tendencies to judge, to believe or not believe, and so on and so forth. Oh, the video that Cal sent was called "Stop Sensationalizing the Dalai Lama's Innocent Actions." And if there's an interest, I would put it on the Wild Fox email list. It shows the whole story. It's not an edited clip. It's an extended video piece. It shows the child, shows the mother who's sitting right there. It shows that the child, in the thing, the little clip, it says that the child is upset and distraught. And if you look at this thing, the child is smiling and clearly very happy to be there with the Dalai Lama, and vice versa. And their basic thesis is that the edited one has been put out and promoted by the Chinese Communist Party's trolls, who would like to do anything that they can to discredit the Dalai Lama and Tibet, especially at the time that they've just identified his successor. So this was sort of a propitious moment to attack Buddhism. Don't know. So I'm going to sort of, if people would like, I'll put it up. I think you look at it, this is because this is part of this whole thing. We all need to sort of take our own responsibility and make our own judgments. No one can do that for us. And this is so complex and so nuanced. So back to Brad, who his initial thing about the dark side of the Dalai Lama, he presents an extensive case about the Aum Shinrikyo. I don't know if you remember them, but they were the cult that released the sarin gas in the Tokyo subways and elsewhere, killing a number of people and injuring many. And the head of that cult was a fellow by the name of Shoko Asahara, who's since been executed for those crimes. Well, Brad presents information, evidence, pictures of Shoko Asahara sitting with the Dalai Lama, and the fact that the Dalai Lama granted him audience 7 times. And further, the fact that Shoko Asahara donated approximately $3 million to you don't imagine you could donate money to the Dalai Lama, but to whatever foundations or things that he's connected with, as evidence that even the Dalai Lama's perception was tainted by money. In the following talk that Brad gave, he kind of walked that back a little bit. And if you have a chance to see both those, he kind of recanted a little and saying, well, I guess he really didn't know, at the time that the Dalai Lama was meeting with him, those attacks hadn't occurred. There's no way he could know this guy was a murderer because the guy hadn't murdered anybody yet. And yet he should have realized that there was something wrong. I find that somewhat improbable. I don't think the Dalai Lama keeps his own calendar. I don't think he makes his appointments. I think he has aides who do all those things for him. And, if you're granted an audience with the Dalai Lama, you're lucky to, come in and sit for the length of time of a cup of tea or something, and then you're ushered off till the next person. So I don't think that connotes any degree of friendship or endorsement between this guy and the Dalai Lama, but that's there. So that's this other side of this dialectic. And we're in a difficult position in these times. Because history has for has for so long covered up inappropriate actions, whether they're minor indiscretions or major abuses. And of course, in recent years, we've had Me Too, among other things, which were bringing the light or bringing the air to these things, which was truth telling. And so we're in a climate today where we are, perhaps rightly so, suspicious of people in power, suspicious of men, old men, because many have behaved badly, and much of it has been covered up or ignored. Or even worse, the people who have been the victims have been attacked, as we're seeing in a rather conspicuous trial that's going on right now. So we have this pendulum is kind of in motion, trying to find the right balance. And it's been way over here for a long time. Now it's swinging back over here. I don't know if it will ever achieve balance. But again, I think I think we come back once again to the Zen peacemaker model. Begins with what? Begins with not knowing. That is going in with a clear mind, without preconceptions, without judgments. How easy is that? On issues where we feel greater passion, on issues where we have personal history, that maintaining that not knowing, which is the rudiment of our being able to see clearly, is not easy to do. And that segues into the second piece, bearing witness. When we freed ourselves from our preconceptions, from our judgments, from our prejudices, from our fears, from our frustrations, from our hatreds, then and only then are we able to bear witness, to see what's right there, what's truly there. And then once we've established that, then we're called upon to act, to respond with compassion and loving kindness. That is incredibly hard. That whole process is incredibly hard when we have strong feelings, when we have prejudices and biases, when we have our own life history, our own pain, or the pain of those we've loved, clouding our judgments or coloring our judgments. Incredibly hard. That simple 3-step path really calls upon us to be our best selves. To not be forming judgments. To not carry prejudices. And, as a white person in this culture, for example, I believe that it's impossible not to have some prejudicial attitudes toward people of color. We have been so indoctrinated, especially those of us that are older, who grew up in a world where that kind of prejudice was Well, now it's coming back, but certainly there was a period of time when it was a little less conspicuous, and now it's conspicuous again. But we grew up with it. Nobody thought anything about it. That movies portrayed Africans as these ignorant, mumbling, half-naked people running around the jungle or whatever. The stereotypes are so prolific and so integrated into our dominant culture that we're often not even aware that they're there. And we're not aware that they've contaminated our thinking and our attitudes until something pops up. That's where this not knowing is so important. I mean, I'm just picking one issue. There are many on which we've been contaminated by our culture, by our families, by our neighbors, by our communities, to harbor erroneous or prejudicial points of view. And they can contaminate our responses, contaminate our thinking. If you said to me, Peter, are you a racist? I say, oh, absolutely, I'm not a racist. And then I watch myself and these thoughts pop in my head. And I think, where the fuck did that come from? But I know where it came from. It came from living in a fundamentally racist society for 77 years. It's there. It's on every nightly news. And I'm not talking about Fox News. I'm talking about real news. It's there. Where does the camera go? Who are they portraying as violent? Who are they portraying as drug addicts? Who are they portraying as people who are unhoused? Those things, those prejudices are everywhere. And the subtler they are, the more pernicious they are. So if we have the idea that we're going to live in concert with this Dharma, with this, Bernie's 3 steps there are really a very simple compression of the Dharma. If we could do those 3 things, we'd be living it. We'd be living it every day. We'd be following the precepts. Not knowing, bearing witness, acting with love and kindness and compassion. And it's extremely hard. And knowing what's right, difficult. So yesterday I went to the food co-op in Belfast. It's where we do most of our grocery shopping. And right at the front door was a group raising money. Now that group was a group that I know about because I was in the, and still am in the field of treatment of addictions for more than a couple of decades. And I knew that they are not in the mainstream of addiction treatment, that they in fact may be verging on being a cult, that they treat young people not with accepted addiction technologies, but with extreme right-wing Christian views in a very strong program of indoctrination that some people might say was a cult or a cult-like thing. And there have even been allegations of abuse against them and over the years. And so I was very, to me, the co-op is kind of like one of my safe spaces in life. It's kind of, So to see these people collecting money on the front doorstep of the co-op was disconcerting to me. What should I do? Do I say something? Do I ignore it? Do I, am I speaking disparagingly? Am I maybe speaking out of turn? Maybe it's none of my business. All of those things occurred to me, and probably some others. Well, making the long story short, I got the name of the person who's responsible for making these decisions for the co-op. And I found a very authoritative piece online that had been put up by an organization for the separation of church and state. And it was based on the research that was done for a piece in the New Yorker a couple of years ago that details what's going on with this particular organization and some of the history and some of the young people that have been seriously aggrieved by the way that they were treated there, and so on and so forth. Did I do the right thing? I don't know. I was uncomfortable doing it. I'm still uncomfortable. And I'm hoping they'll do something, because if they don't do something, then the question is, do I take it further? Do I go to the board of the co-op? I kind of, I don't want to become a shrill voice. Maybe this isn't that big a deal. It just really bothered me. And I felt, they don't talk about really who they are or what they do or how they do it. They're just, we're out fighting addiction and young people, help us. And that sounds, godmother and apple pie. People take their wallets out and give them money. Is that deceptive? I think it's at least verging on deception. Anyway, so these things are happening all the time. They're part of our lives. It's not just something happening in Dharamsala with the Dalai Lama. These questions of ethics, of responding appropriately, of responding with the Dharma. Did I, as a Buddhist teacher, respond from the place of the Dharma when I sent that email to the co-op? I don't know. So that's the other bottom line here, is if we're going to act responsibly, and if we're going to act in accord with the Dharma, then we have to be willing to accept the discomfort. That's what's driving so much of what's problematic in this country, in this world today, is people cannot tolerate the discomfort. They want moral certainty. I know what's right. No doubt. Moral certainty. Okay. And therefore, I can't tolerate anybody else's perspectives. If I'm right, absolutely right, then everybody else that disagrees with me must be absolutely wrong. That's the bifurcated reality that we're living in today. That's the very root of some of what's happening, is that people cannot tolerate ambiguity. They cannot tolerate uncertainty. They cannot accept existential responsibility. And so they want to shut it down. And the best way to shut it down is to become absolutely right. And everybody that disagrees with you is absolutely wrong. And the Dharma says, no, we've got to come from the place of not knowing. And even if we bear witness, we're not going to get certainty. We may never get comfort. But if we respond with loving kindness and compassion, we're probably doing the right thing. I hope that many of you will choose to watch. I will post the video about the Dalai Lama, because who he is as a person, at least for me, comes shining through brilliantly. He is such a warm, loving, and compassionate person, far beyond anybody else that I'm aware of. And it shows up. And probably if I keep going here, I'm going to get more upset about it. So the fact that he's being accused. But I leave it to you all to make up your minds. Thank you.
Peter, it's my understanding that there is within the Tibetan community a number of different factions. We might call them political factions or threads, just as there are in Catholicism or Judaism, and they don't necessarily agree with each other. And in some cases, they do not support the Dalai Lama. So an element of that may be at play here and showing up for us to see.
Yeah. The Tibetans are human. That's the problem.
I appreciate you talking about this because it leads right into something I've been mulling over. The local politics, and I'm not typically a political person. Book banning in our schools. I live in a tiny town in Maine called Standish, and someone has been agitating and kind of took over a local school board meeting trying to ban a book or so that they say proposes, I don't know, LBQ whatever rights, or talks openly about sex or something. I'm not quite sure. I wasn't at the meeting, but I've been invited to the next meeting where people who don't want the book banned are proposing to show up and have a presence being signified by showing up and wearing green at the meeting. And so, as I said, I've never really participated in political stuff, and I'm not quite sure if I'm reacting from an egoic, they're wrong kind of feeling, that conviction that, damn it, I'm right, and those people don't know what the hell they're talking about, and we got to get rid of those goddamn whatever the hell they are out of my town. So this really speaks to it, Peter, and I really appreciate you sharing your story because it really helps me work on it. So thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, these things are really, really, really hard, and I think, you mentioned book banning. Book banning is not political. Political is whether we raise our taxes or lower our taxes, when I hear book banning, I immediately go to Nazi Germany. That's sort of my conditioning around the issue. And the book burnings and Kristallnacht and these various things that were in part of the ramp up to the Nazi control of Germany. And so for me personally, this is me personally, when I hear that, I feel like I cannot not respond. Because to not respond to that kind of, I'm going to sound hyperbolic, but I don't see it hyperbolic. When people are moving towards fascism, which is what I see that as, I believe we have an obligation to speak. I shouldn't say we, I feel like I have an obligation. And to me, that's not politics. again, politics is who's going to be the dog catcher this year. Even the dog catcher in the White House, but those fundamental human rights to me transcend that. But that, again, me personal, I feel strongly about that.
An issue for me is, I try not to feel like my side is automatically right, and I lean Democratic, so I'm naturally going to be prejudiced against views of Republicans, just as they are prejudiced against views of Democrats, so at some level, I think, well, it's basically probably all the same. We're both sides have the same attitudes against each other, and there in some way there's no real difference, even though the views are different. But if you think about Nazi Germany, for instance, when Hitler was rising, those who supported Hitler were wrong. I mean, it's just a matter of they were completely wrong, and they had to be stopped. And so that sort of modesty of saying, well, who am I to think that I'm right? And just automatically, because I'm me, so just who am I to be that certain? That would lead to just allowing Hitler to rise and doing nothing about it, and so it really is a difficult problem. But I do think, and you just hinted at this, that a key to it is seeing if one side is acting in a way that is not compassionate in the moment, like Hitler might have, the Nazis had some idea, well, it's good for society overall, our society overall, if we get rid of all the Jews, even though it's challenging to do so, So it's like this idea of long-term, it's the right thing to do. But if it was so incredibly heartless and uncompassionate in the moment, so it seems like a sign of who is right is compassion in the moment.
Yeah. Thank you, Gary. It's so hard because look, what are people saying? We're being compassionate to those unborn children. We're being compassionate by taking away women's rights to choose. Well, compassion can be a two-edged sword.
I think when we talk about compassion and talking about everything that's coming up today, especially in right now, like, okay, the book banning, I just am compassionate for humans on both or all sides trying to figure it out. I think about, well, we might say, okay, let's ban Huckleberry Finn because of the use of the N-word in almost every paragraph. And we say, well, all right, that one, we'll throw that one out, right? But LGBTQ books, well, no, we can't throw those out. And then once you take a side, well, you take a side. And I think it's about, for me, looking at two sides, or again, all sides, just trying to figure it out, which is probably what's always been going on and probably always will go on in whatever content area it may be. It's just that. It's just folks trying to find a light in the darkness and usually fighting with each other the whole time. Oh, and since I have the mic, I don't know Brad. I'm assuming he's a Zen teacher or practitioner of some sort. And I don't mean to in any way put him down, but it seems like he's got a take. He's not really living in the land of not knowing, with this talk that he's put forth on the dark side of the Dalai Lama. And what struck me as I'm listening to you today, Peter, is, well, why wouldn't the Dalai Lama meet with someone who certainly not actively has plans to put sarin gas in a subway, but maybe but go to prisons and talk with people who have done acts like that? I mean, not trying to put down the Dalai Lama, but it shouldn't just be Oprah and Bono that he's meeting with, right? I mean, it would seem that it would be good for him to be meeting with folks in hospice and folks in prison and folks in refugee camps, and I don't, folks who are actively suffering. So I'm sure he does. I'm sure he has. I just hear about Bono and Oprah more, but so anyway.
They have better publicists than the Dalai Lama. I think that's, and a few billion more dollars. Well, one of the things that I'm never supposed to do is to speak ill of another Zen teacher, and I kind of toe up to that line occasionally, and I hope I don't cross it. But I don't think it's speaking ill to say I disagree with something that he said, and he's a controversial guy. And to some extent he lives on controversy. He's kind of part of his whole rap was this whole thing about the poor monk and portraying the Dalai Lama as this poor monk. And yeah, maybe he doesn't have personal possessions, but there are foundations, there's millions of dollars. He's not wanting for anything. He's not a poor monk. He had a little rap about that. And then he concludes by saying, and please give me some money to PayPal or whatever for hearing this talk, because this is my sole way of supporting myself. Is that hypocritical? Is it maybe slightly jealous that Dalai Lama is getting millions and he's getting $10? I don't know. I don't want to judge Brad either. I understand, it's these are tough issues. Tough.
That phrase, moral certitude. Can you guys hear me? Because the boat motor's going. Okay.
Yeah.
That phrase, moral certitude, really resonated with me when I heard you say it at another Dharma talk too, at the retreat. And it connected to, that's my sense of righteousness, that being that little kid who wants to be right and, feel good about being right and not be wrong. And it's just there inside of us, this sense of wanting that righteousness, even though it's kind of a red flag for me now when I'm feeling like that. I have to look at it. But it is very human to want to just, make a statement, be right, not have anybody, and not feel like you have to justify it. Sometimes once you feel it's right, then you no longer feel the need to take in more information, and I think that's one of the danger points. Along with so much of these problems come from people's fears. The wanting to be right about these things has to do with these kind of underlying fears of their social standing, what they think society should do, what's going to happen to their kids, what's going to happen to their livelihood. All those kinds of fears are there too.
I'm sorry, Melissa, I can only hear a portion of what you said. Can somebody recap a little bit? No.
Uh, I heard Melissa say that she appreciated this talk and others that you've given on the topic of false certitude, and that it's such a human characteristic to receive some information and immediately make that judgment and not be open to more facts. Close off immediately.
And also what resonated for me with what Melissa said is that, I think moral certitude, the way I interpreted what you said, Melissa, moral certitude is often predicated on fear. I think that having moral certitude can assuage some fear in a certain way. So yeah, I don't know if that's what I took from what you said.
And I'll go just a step further. The example that's been going through my mind since you talked about Angulimala was my 17-year-old granddaughter, who engages regularly in extreme drama among her friends, who send out on social media comments, frequently negative comments about one person or the other. And I kind of came to the conclusion my granddaughter needs to be an activist, because she was just so incensed that someone would, this girl would say X, Y, and Z about someone else. And then at the weekly gathering, she received some kind of citizenship award. And how can this be? And those of us who tried to protect the girl, and da, 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 da. And and I talked to her parents, and I said, this just doesn't sound right. And they said, well, you don't know the whole story. That yes, this drama goes on quite a bit, and this particular girl who received the citizenship award, the school official said, we look for opportunities of kids doing something right. And when they do something right, we want to acknowledge that and to support that. And so that was the case in what had my granddaughter so enraged. And I don't know that she can hear that explanation, being an immature 17-year-old. But it certainly seemed to be a small vignette of the whole situation that you're talking about, and no place for forgiveness.
So the Dalai Lama's closing comment to this young boy was something to the effect of, don't be one of the people who engages in wars and killing. Be one of the people who's loving and kind. There it is. It says it all right there. Just hard to figure out sometimes what the loving kind thing is. The next stage of my dilemma with the co-op is if this person, she's the outreach coordinator, if she doesn't do something, then do I let it drop? Or do I ask to speak to the board or send a letter to the board? Hopefully I won't even have to make that decision, but these things are always multi-layered too. Okay.
Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it.
Of course, I need to make some last comment. You know, last week, my younger son, who lives in Yarmouth now, had to shelter in place because of the act, or he lives right by 295, and had to shelter in place because of the active shooting on the highway that was going on there. And somebody else just told me that they're good friends with the parents of the young man who did the shooting in Knoxville. So these things are coming closer to home. You know, it's therefore so important that we pay attention, and that, you know, we not make our choices based on fear, but based on compassion and dharma. Thank you.